For today, I'm going to use a little bit of everything from all the readings because they're pretty short readings, so I think it would be wise to use a little bit from everything. One of the things is that we see in the book of Genesis, in Genesis 18, is that the Lord appears to Abraham. And when the Lord appears to Abraham, it's an interesting mix between the singular and the plural. Sir, but yet he says them, yourselves, the men. So it's an interesting mix of singular, plural, but the Lord is appearing to him. And so you have that great icon of the Trinity then appearing to Abraham. That's an icon, famous icon by Rublev, that is, you can take a look at and gives a beautiful kind of a representation of this mystery. In the second reading, what we have is St. Paul saying, I rejoice in the sufferings for your sake and filling up what is lacking in the afflictions of Christ on behalf of his body, which is the church. So one of the things that it's not is that it's not that Christ's sufferings were insufficient, that we need to do more, we need to fill it up, it's only like half full, we need to fill it up. But instead, what we see is there's a priest, Father Francis Martin, who had passed several years ago, who was a priest of the Archdiocese of Washington. He has a great thoughts on this particular reading. One is that he talks about the reality of Christ in us, live through us, and rising with us. So the suffering Christ is to bless others in that suffering. There was a story that he used, I think it's a great illustration. There was two martyrs of the early church, Perpetua and Felicity. Perpetua was the mistress, Felicity was the maid. But they were both captured, they were both going to be martyred for their faith as Christians. And so Felicity was pregnant, she was in pain at the time due to childbirth, and the soldiers came over and started mocking her, saying, well, if you're in such pain now, what's going to happen when they feed you to the lions, when they feed you to the beasts? And she said, right now I'm suffering, but out there another is suffering in me. And so that gives that thought and that idea. The next one is the gospel. And the gospel is that famous story of Mary and Martha. Jesus comes to the house of Mary and Martha. Martha is burdened with much serving. She is doing what is traditionally the role of the woman, to provide hospitality, to provide service. Interestingly, Mary is kind of in the role kind of reserved for the men, that she was the one there at the feet of Jesus. Usually in that time and in that culture, the women would be the ones who would be cleaning and serving, and the men would be the one listening to the rabbi. So in a way, when she's talking about, Lord, help me, well, I think you can take it in two ways. You can take it that she's kind of appalled that Mary is taking the kind of the role that's reserved more for men, being there at the feet of the rabbi. But also, again, is that traditional role of service. And service and hospitality was very important in that culture. And so one of the things that was important was to have food prepared, to have the house in order when guests would arrive. And so she's saying, tell her to help me. But Jesus says, that she's chosen the better part. And what it doesn't mean is that it doesn't mean that everybody should be contemplative 100% of the time, that we should do that. Because if we did that, then, society as a whole would certainly go down. Society as a whole would certainly, there would be problems if somebody was to be contemplative 100% of the time and nobody doing any work. And so it's not really that, but really what it is thinking about what is truly important at the time. That it's certainly important to have something prepared for Jesus. It's certainly something important to have, food prepared, the house in order. But even more important is listening to what he has to say. And so one of the things that's important in our lives. I always think that people need to kind of think about how do they start the day off in prayer. Because one of the things that happens with prayer is that if we don't start the day off and offer the Lord that first fruits in prayer, then it just kind of goes to the end and we're just kind of struggling because other things have come in and other things have kind of filled it up. And so we're busy about doing many different things. But really, when we think about it, is that the better was meant to start the day in prayer, to start the day with our Lord, and then ask the Lord to help us during the day, the difficulties, the struggles, the triumphs that will occur inevitably during our day. Thanks and God bless.